This might just be the most evil couple ever. Let me break it down for you. Meet Donald and Jean, an older couple living together in the United States. At the time of this story, Donald was 56 years old and Jean was 55. They had no children of their own, but one day they decided to adopt. Maybe they felt lonely. Maybe they thought having children around would bring some joy. So they went to a shelter and adopted 5 black siblings, a 1-year-old baby girl, a 4-year-old girl, a 6-year-old boy, a 9-year-old girl, and their oldest sister, who was 11 years old. All of them were biologically related. On the outside, it seemed like a beautiful story, an older couple giving these children a loving home. But in reality, this was a nightmare. The moment they finished the adoption process, Donald and Jean packed up and moved with the children to a farm in another state. And that was when their true plan was revealed. They did not adopt these children because they wanted to love and care for them. No. They wanted free workers for their farm. Instead of treating them like children, sending them to school, making sure they had food, clothes, and a safe home, Donald and Jean forced them to work like slaves. Every single day, for 12 hours straight, these children were made to do heavy labor, digging with their bare hands, carrying huge, heavy loads, fixing broken farm equipment. And remember, the oldest was just 11 years old. The youngest was still a baby when this started. And this was not just for a few months. This abuse went on for 5 years. Over time, neighbors in the area started noticing something strange. They saw these children always outside, always working, never playing, never just being children. Something felt off. So, worried about their safety, they called Child Protective Services to investigate. But when Child Protective Services arrived, they found nothing. Somehow, Donald and Jean managed to cover up everything before the inspectors got there. Maybe they hid the children. Maybe they threatened them into silence. Nobody really knows how they pulled it off. But Child Protective Services left without taking action, and the abuse continued. Now, you would think this would be a wake-up call for Donald and Jean, that maybe they would stop. Maybe they would return the children to the shelter instead of treating them like slaves. But no. Instead of changing their ways, they decided to sell the farm to erase any proof of what had been happening. Then, they packed up and moved again, this time to a 3-bedroom house in another state, far away, with barely any neighbors around. And here is where things got even worse. Even though the house had enough space, the children were not allowed to live inside with them. Instead, Donald and Jean locked them up in a barn outside. Now, this was not just any barn. It was basically a prison. It could only be opened from the outside, so once the children were inside, they had no way of getting out. There was no running water, no toilet, barely any air coming in. The place was disgusting, and these poor children were forced to sleep there every night after a long day of hard labor. This horrible abuse went on for months. But then, one woman named Candice, a neighbor in the area, noticed something strange. She saw how these children were being treated, always working, always looking tired and sad. She knew something was not right, so she took action. First, she called Child Protective Services, but for some reason, they did not respond. So instead of waiting, she called the police directly. And when officers arrived, they were shocked. The barn was locked, so they had to break the door open with a crowbar. And what they found inside, it was heartbreaking. The children were filthy. They looked sick and starving. Their clothes were soaking wet and smelled horrible. One of the boys had sores all over his feet, probably from years of being overworked and walking barefoot in rough conditions. Donald and Jean were arrested immediately. When they went to court, there was no doubt they were guilty. And on January 29th, 2025, justice was served. Donald was sentenced to 160 years in prison. Jean got even more, 215 years behind bars. They will never hurt another child again. But the damage they left behind, that is something those children will have to carry forever.